Hello everyone, welcome to the new session of the end-to-end VoLTE training campaign. In today's video, we're going to go through the VoLTE key actions, including the main features and also the parameters, which can be done to improve the VoLTE performance. We'll cover firstly the high-level view of the key features and actions which can be done in the network. Then we'll try to go through one by one, especially for the VoLTE features part, which is more related into RAN part. So let's move forward and see what we have. So actually this figure or mind map is summarizing like some of, or say, let's say the VoLTE main key actions. As you can see here, I split this one into 4 categories. In general, usually when you optimize VoLTE networks, you will just look into features or actions or features in general, which can improve coverage and robustness, okay? Then you have the mobility management, where you can improve, for example, the network performance through improving the layering strategy, and you have different features. Then we have some specific parameter tunings, including whatever mentioned here, as for example, tuning the maximum ROHC retransmission. Then you have some actions which is more related into end-to-end view, which can improve the VoLTE call setup time delay. So our main focus actually would be in the first area, which is related to the main features and the VoLTE. So in today's video, we're going to cover the first two parts, which is related to TTI bundling and robust header compression. And the main important point that I will be covering those two parts also from using the logs, just to show you how to verify the feature functionality and how this kind of feature you can confirm how this kind of feature is working from the logs or not. So let's move forward and see what we have. Actually, before I jump into the details of the two main features which we are going to cover today, I just would like to let you understand. Usually, any feature tuning will rely or would depend on this kind of box, which is related to the what kind of inputs is being reported to the InnoD and or being configured within the InnoD and or the BTS, and what the InnoD do and what kind of resource will be allocated. So if you look into this box, you'll find that you have different inputs. I'll just give some of them here, which is, for example, UE related inputs related to the UE capability, measurement gaps, and the synchronization stats, and so on. Then you have this kind of ROHC feedback, which is, for example, the user replying for its acknowledgement or non-acknowledgement, and this can have some configuration from the InnoD, for example, to increase the number of non-acknowledgement trial or retransmission trial, which can be done from either in downlink or uplink. Same, you have the InnoD will differentiate between the surfaces, for example, using the XCI. For example, XCI1 will have a different budget delay or budget delay compared to, for example, XCI9 or 5 or 8 or even 5. So as overall quality of service parameters, not only for the packet delay, I mean. And also you have this kind of channel input CSI, which is being reported just to indicate to InnoD what kind of radio condition of these users is being now, for example, what is the CQI channel quality indicator and so on. So the InnoD can start selecting his MCS selection and so on. And you have also the downlink power configuration. For example, you can have the reference signal power, you can increase it, decrease it. You can have some optimization in BDCH power, you can increase and reduce it. Then you have the transmission mode, whether you are going to use closed loop, open loop, and so on. All these kind of inputs, the InnoD will take these inputs and we'll try to make the calculation for the scheduling calculations and to check what kind of priority, for example, which users having highest priority for in terms of scheduling compared to the others, start to, based on these inputs, selecting them and so on. Then it will decide which user is being selected for the scheduling and the resource blocks, for example, which being allocated for user and MCS. Why I'm using this part? Usually any features or even parameters or even any optimization actions, if you understand this box very well, you will be able to know what you can do. For example, if you would like to increase the robustness, you can increase, for example, the number of hard retransmission, but still this is, you need to understand this is, for example, can increase retransmission resources. So you need to be very careful whenever you optimize this kind of things. But any action can be done here. It can having improvement or even degradation on your inputs. So just like you need to understand that in general, VoLTE is, or even 4G or 5G, is more about link adaptation. How the InnoD is doing link adaptation based on the inputs you are giving or even configuration. So again, all the feature will be playing in this inputs here, in order to optimize and get a good results as a scheduling results for the user. So let's move forward and see what we have for the two features. So the first feature we're going to cover is related to TTI bundling. As you know, this TTI bundling is, you can say it's now becomes like standard features, as it's almost enabled by default for any vendor or even operator, and it's like mandatory, one of the mandatory features that must be enabled. But in today's session, I'm try to cover it from different perspective. Also, I would like to add one additional point related to something called advanced TTI bundling, which is need some optimization, sometimes need some to be enabled for some vendors and so on. And also you need just to understand how this kind of advanced TTI bundle is working. So initially let me explain how TTI bundling in general is working. In the normal case scenario, if you look into that part here in the left, in the normal scheduling scenario, the resources will be scheduled right in 1 millisecond. So all the data will be sent, for example, within particular TTI from the unit B, the UE in terms of uplink to the unit B will be transmitted in this particular TTI. But once the unit B trigger TTI bundling, and in general how TTI bundling is being triggered, TTI bundling actually is being based on uplink SNR, PUSCH SNR. So for example, if this uplink SNR is falling below a certain configured threshold, let's assume that the threshold of the SNR is 10 dB, and now the user is having 7 or 6 dB or whatever. So the unit B will decide that this user should enter the TTI bundling state because it will assume that this user having a bad radio condition. So the NLP would like the users to enter the TTI bundling state in order to get a better performance in terms of uplink. How this can be done? The NLP will send RRC configuration message to the user, asking him, now you are in TTI bundling state, so now you can start using the scheduling of the TTI bundling. So in general, how the scheduling of TTI bundling is being done, as you can see in the figure, assuming now that before the normal scheduling, the user was transmitting one, for example, transport block here. Now this one will be retransmitted or being sent by the users. Like the same data will be sent 4 times in 4 consecutive TTIs as shown here, but with different redundancy version. But the same data will be transmitted. Accordingly, this will be reflecting in the decoding process from the NLP side. Will be like a diversity, so that you will have higher energy per bit, per bit. So that this means you are improving your uplink coverage because you have a better decoding from the NLP side because you are sending 4 different data and 4 consecutive TTIs. Sorry, same data in 4 consecutive TTIs with different redundancy version. So this will improve the redundancy performance and will result in higher energy per bit. So can improve the uplink coverage by around 2 to 3 dB. Now, the idea here, as you can see for the acknowledgement part, it will be sent after 4 milliseconds from the last transport clock being set. For example, here you need to count 1, 2, 3, 4. So will be like, you assume from the first packet till the last, it should be around 8 milliseconds. While in the normal scheduling, it will be sent here for the acknowledgement. So can be, you can assume it as one of, it can increase the delay a little bit, but usually the TI bundling is more triggered for the very bad users, especially or edge user for the uplink. So this will have a good performance. The second and the most important part as well, now explain that in terms of coverage, you will have a higher energy per bit, so it will improve your uplink path loss uplink coverage by around 2 to 3 dB, sometimes up to 4. But still, you have also some capacity gain. How this kind of capacity gain you can observe this capacity gain based on TTI bundling. In case of without TTI bundling, if the user is already in the edge coverage and he having a very poor performance on the uplink, so in this case he will need to have this kind of RLC segmentation. He is having he have less energy now or have less power because he cannot send the complete packet in one time because he have limited uplink coverage. So the user will the RLC layer will do the segmentation into, for example, as you can see here, four buckets. For example, instead of 1, it will be sent in 4. And the idea and it will be sent in 4, as you can see, in 4 transport block. Each one will be sent in different TTI, but this different data is being split. Why here the splitting is being done? The splitting is being done to increase the power per bit or per resource block. So you will have a much better coverage whenever you do a segmentation. But also the segmentation is increasing or decreasing the capacity because for each one of those you will require a BDCH allocation, right? Then it be which TTI or which he can send this particular data. So you need a 4 BDCH allocations, and also for each one of those you will write your UE will require to send acknowledgement for each of those packets which being sent in the TTI. So this is also increasing the hard feedback. Instead of one hard feedback, you have hard feedback. But in case if the TTI bundling is being triggered and the input be already instructed the UE to enter the TTI bundling state, what will happen? In this case, the user know that there is a better performance or better decoding and even having higher energy per bit. So because he's in TTI bundling state, so he will send a complete RLC. For example, it was SDU, BDU. It will send the same one without any segmentation. So this will result again in sending this same TB, but only transport clock and for TTIs. So this one would result in less BDCH allocation. So it can have improvement in your BDCH allocation in case of the segmentation point of view, and also will have one HARC feedback because for those four TTI, for those four transmitted data, then same data in four consecutive TTI, it only require one HARC feedback. So in this case, you will have a better performance in terms of improving capacity because you will not have any RLC segmentation anymore. And also one of the things that can be triggered out of the TTI bundling, whenever the users enter the TTI bundling state, he will be out of the DRX. He will exit DRX directly, so he will not be in DRX anymore. So this also can have some reflection even in latency or even in the quality point of view. So this is the three main gain of the TTI bundling. And just a side note, usually the TTI bundling is supported by FDD. It can be supported by TDD in very specific cases and depend on the, as mentioned here in below comment, depend on the subframe configuration. Usually we use this sub configuration 2, which is SA2, which is called subframe assignment, which is as a location, it's 622, means 6 for downlink, 2 for uplink, and 2 for uplink. 6 for downlink and 2 for uplink. And 2 can be guard band or can be like having a dynamic between uplink and downlink. And the idea that usually that the TTI bundling require a 4 TTIs for uplink, right? That's why you will have a limitation TTI bundling. That's why it's only being supported by this kind of configuration, 0, 1, and 6. But usually those kind of configuration is not being used. Usually use the subframe configuration 2, and also doesn't work with the semi-persistent scheduling for the same U. So this is just an extra comment. Now let's move forward to see how can you verify the TTI bundling from the UE logs. And secondly, what it means by advanced TTI bundling. Before going to the advanced TTI bundling or how to verify in general TTI bundling from the DT logs, I would like to just recall one point. One of the limitations of the TTI bundling, once the TTI bundling state is being triggered, you will see if you read this, if you quoted this from 3GPP, we can see that if the parameter of TTI bundling provided by high layers is set to true, means TTI bundling is being triggered, then the modulation order MCS will be set to 2, and this will be like QBSK, which means you have only 2 bits can be transmitted in the uplink, and the resource blocks will be limited to maximum 3 resource blocks. So in this case, what it means, but once the bundling is being triggered, so assume that the user is doing a VoLTE call and he have uplink data or you need to do something in the uplink, so your uplink data will be very limited in this case of the TI bundling. So this was using the TI bundling, this was causing a limitation in uplink through. But now after the release, starting from release 12 upwards, the 3GPP like introduced this capability for the devices, which is if the users is the user to release 12 and he will be supporting this like in the capability, you can check this kind of information, which is called no resource restriction for TTI bundling release 12. This means that you support TTI bundling regulation without resource allocation restriction. This kind of resource blocks will not be any more applicable for those release 12 users. And usually we call this as advanced TTI bundling. And also there is one additional functionality which can be done. Here is called enhanced HARC pattern FDD release 12. This means that here for the you support something called enhanced HARC pattern for TTI bundling operation for FDD. Usually that in case of retransmission in the normal TTI bundle, it requires 16 milliseconds for the normal users to make the retransmission. But in case of the enhanced HARC, it will only require 12 milliseconds. So this can be reflected also in latency improvement. And I will show you an example from the logs how to verify and how to check this kind of capability and how to check whether advanced or enhanced HARC is being enabled or not. So let's see. So here we'll just check how advanced TTI bundling or TTI bundling general is to confirm from logs whether it's being activated or not. And the second point, that will explain what it means by enhanced HARC pattern release, and we'll check also how to confirm the logs. The first two commands here is just quoted from 3GPP document, which I just showed to you in the previous slide. So initially what will happen, if the first of all, the ENOD will check whether the user is achieving the TTI bundling condition, which is again based on the user's uplink radio condition, which is SINR. So assume that he's not achieving, so he will not be triggered. So the ENOD will decide that this user is not a candidate for TTI bundling, so no TTI bundling will be triggered. But instead, in case of the TTI bundling is being triggered, then the ENOD will check the capability of this user, whether he's supporting this enhanced HARC pattern release 12 or not. If it's not supporting, then the users will use the old process, which is read to the binary release. So the HARC RTT is 60 milliseconds, as I mentioned, and the maximum uplink BRBs will be limited to 3. So those particular users, and even if the feature is not being enabled, will having a limitation in even uplink, and will having kind of latency increase. So this is kind of the drawback. But in case if the capability is being supported and this feature is, or this parameter is being enabled, and this is, you need to check with your vendor, maybe they have a different perspective, but this is just from 3GPP. If it's being enabled, so that the bundling, this means the bundling release 12 is being supported, so the HARC RTT will reduce from 16 to 12 milliseconds, and now you can get even more than 3 resource blocks for the uplink allocation. And in the right figure, this is how to confirm in general how TTI bundling is, whether TTI is being triggered or not. First thing you need to check under the RSC configuration message will be sent from the ENOD B to the UE. Under this RSC configuration message, you will find something called radio resource configuration dedicated, as shown here. Under that, you need to check the MAC parameters, which is MAC main configuration. You'll find if it's being triggered, this one will be true. If TTI bundling in general is not being triggered, this one will be false. This is for the normal HARC. But in case of enhanced HARC, as you can see here, also it will be the same. If the user supporting is fine after MAC, under MAC configuration V1020, we'll find that there is additional something called eHARC pattern release 12 is being supported, and this is indicate that the user now is falling under this category, so he even can have a better latency and has no limitation anymore in the uplink resource block allocation. So this can also give a better performance in terms of uplink through. And this is all what I need to discuss about TTI. Now let's move forward to the second feature, which is robust header compression. Okay, now it's about robust header compression. This is also a standard feature which is usually enabled by default. You just need to check or make an audit for your network, but usually this is being enabled. But let's just explain how this feature is working and what kind of improvement we can get whenever we enable this feature, and how also to verify from the drive test whether the feature is being enabled or supported by the users or not. Okay, as if you can recall, robust header compression in general, what it do, as mentioned by the name, as stated by the name, it just make a header compression. So the main advantage of this feature is trying to reduce or make a header compression to reduce in general the packet size. And if you reduce the packet size, you will be able even to improve your uplink performance or block error rate, because you will have, for example, assume you're using 20 resource blocks on uplink location, but after the packet reduction, size reduction, you need also to only to use 10 resource blocks instead of 20. So you will have even more power per resource element. So this will be reflected in you having a better uplink coverage and even less block error rate, or much better block error rate. So the main advantage here, you are improving the capacity in general because you are doing a reduction for the packet size, and you're improving your uplink performance, especially for block error rate and coverage as well. So this is actually the general idea in the left here. If you look into the left as a general high level concept, you see, for example, this is the compressor and this is the decompressor, even sender or receiver. So in the compressor, what's happening in the first, when the packet is being transmitted, as you can see, you have the data or the payload, and you have some here additional header, which is IP header, UDP header, and RTP header. And usually the IP header is having very high size. So actually, the main idea that I would like to confirm that this is happening at the BDCB layer. This is the robust header compression is happening at the BDCB layer. So at the BDCB layer, you will having a compressor. The compressor will establish the context. I will explain this one in more details. Then it will be transmitted. The compressor and the compressor will have an establishment of the context through sending the first packet in general as it is, without any compression. The first packet will be sent from the compressor to the decompressor or sender to receiver. Without the first packet will send without any compressor, but both of them will establish a context out of this packet. For example, this packet have a specific sequence. If you can see here, this packet, for example, is 21XX01. So we found that there is some static numbers within the packets. This is all the packets. It's 21XX01, 21XX02, and till 06. And that the compressor will understand that the context of this one is 21XX0. So they will establish the context, which is, as you can see, between the compressor and the compressor. The first one will be sent as it is. Then they will establish the context, which is 21x00, as highlighted here. Once the context is being established, now only the one which is out of the context will be transferred. So before you used to transfer, let's assume this one as 6 bits or 6 bytes, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6. Now we need only the compressor need only to pass only one packet, and the decompressor, because it's having the context being established, can decode the data successfully. So in this case, usually instead of, or initially you would like to send, for example, 6, let's say bytes, multiplied by 6 also, which is 6 numbers here, you will have 36. So once you establish the context, you need only to transfer 11. 11, why it's 11? Because the first one you need to transmit as it is, which is related to 6, then 7, which is the last digit, 8, 9, 10, 11. So you have 11. Then you need just the compression ratio will be around 70%, because usually you need to transmit 36, but in this case you are transmitting only 11 instead of 36. You have around 70% improvement or reduction in the packet size, and this is how it's been working. And as you can see here, usually this is what happens after the header compression. For example, here you have the larger size of the header is related to IP version 4 or IP version 6. IP version 6 even having higher packets. So usually the robust header compression will reduce it to around 1 to 3 bytes. And if I can recall it, usually IP version 4 have around 40 bytes as a size, and IP version 6 will have around 60 bytes. So at the end, it will reduce to only 1 or 3 bytes, and this is how we get the gain. So now let's jump into how to verify first the capability of the device from the logs, and what kind of requirements, which parameters we need to check from the logs, from the capability, and how also to confirm whether it's being triggered by the ENOD or not. Okay, if you look into this figure, this is actually the figure on the left here. This is if you look into that part under the UE capability information message, which is sent by the UE to the ENOD B. The UE is informing the ENOD B about its own capability. So you need to go through under the BDCP parameters. As you mentioned, that ROC or ROHC is supported by the BDCP layer. So the user is sending something called profile 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and so on. Actually, usually the voice or the robust header compression for the voice is about profile 1 and 2 and even 3, but those are especially 1 and 2. So you need just to check whether those being supported or not. If it's false, this means this particular user is not supporting the robust header compression, because you need support profile 1, 2, and 3 as shown here. So this is the most important from the capability point of view. So you might do some insights in the network to check, for example, how many users supporting the feature or not. Then we can, for example, raise it to the vendors to try to ask them if some device is not supporting, to ask them to try to add the capability for the devices. And here from the ENOD B side, whether during the ROHC configuration when sending KSI1, ROHC configuration to configure KSI1 data radio bearer, it will send under BDCP configuration data, again ROHC in the BDCP layer. So if it's sent not used, this means header compression is not being activated. The feature may be off, not be working. So this means it's not being, or even the user not supporting. But if it's being activated, as you can see here, it will send under the same part here, BDCP layer, under the BDCP configuration. Here, for example, first the RLC, as you know that for KSI1, it's usually using unacknowledged mode. And here this is the ROC configuration. So it will send profile 1 and profile 2, which is showing as true here, which is indicating that yes, robust header compression is being supported. So now we can start establishing our context. And that's it for today's session about the first two features. So the first feature we're going to cover today is called XDRX based on SINR. This can have a different naming for the vendors, but in general, this is a very simple feature and having a very simple mechanism where the ENOD B will simply instruct the UE to go out of to completely disable the DRX for this particular users, for a specific users, in case if the user's radio condition in the uplink is falling below a certain threshold. So what kind I mentioned here based on SNR. For example, let's assume that you have a configured value for uplink SNR in the InnoDB side. So you configure this value for 5 dB. So the InnoDB all the time is measuring the uplink radio condition of the users, either based on the SRS, if it's being enabled for FDD as an example, or which stands for sounding reference signal, or for example, measuring in general, estimating the uplink BOCH SNR. So in case if the SRS is not being enabled, so the InnoDB will estimate the SNR. And once, for example, it's found it's falling below the configured threshold, which we assumed as 5 dB. Let's assume now the user is having 3 dB or 2 dB SNR. So the InnoDB will send him a RSU configuration message to disable completely the DRX to ensure that this user will never enter the DRX whenever his uplink SNR is in a poor radio condition. So what is the benefit we can obtain for that part? Actually, as mentioned here, the three main benefits where we can obtain from disabling the DRX in general, which is reducing the packet loss. I will explain why and how, and also improving the voice quality and downlink scheduling delay. So now, just to understand from where these gains might come, let's try to recall our understanding of the VoLTE DRX or DRX in general, particularly for VoLTE. So before explaining the concept of this kind of improvement, where it comes, why it's coming when we disable the DRX, just let's recall three main important parts. The first part, in 4G retransmission, usually if the user is out of TTI bundling state, is remaking and retransmitting every 8 milliseconds. Means that if the users fail to decode there is a failure to decode, for example, the transmitted packet from the InnoDB side, the retransmission will happen after 8 milliseconds. And the second one here, which is the VoLTE packet delay budget, as we explained in the first session, it's 100 milliseconds. So whenever the packet is delayed for a value greater than this 100 milliseconds, this means the packet will be discarded. It will be even lost or discarded. And the second part here in between, that we mentioned that the InnoDB usually will buffer the data in case buffer the data in the buffer. It will keep it in the buffer in case if the user is already in DRX mode. So it cannot send the data to the user until he is out of the DRX mode. DRX means discontinuous reception, where the user is in sleeping mode, so he cannot receive any data. So let's now try to explain what we have. Now, as you can see here, this is the settings where we assumed something called end duration parameter for DRX. It's 4 milliseconds. We'll explain what it means by this. And long DRX cycle, which is 400 milliseconds. And this is usually the recommended settings by Apple. As this is known, you can find this in most of the VoLTE networks, this kind of configured value. And for example, now let's try to explain through this particular mechanism. As you can see here, for this, assuming that now the InnoDB already received VoLTE packets and it would like to transmit these VoLTE packets and the downlink to the users. So this is the user, and this is the DRX state. So this packet cannot be transmitted from the InnoDB to the UE until the user go to the on duration timer. On duration means he's awake. He's out of the DRX and he's awake. He can now receive the packet. So in this particular case, the InnoDB can transmit it here. But if you remember that the VoLTE packet in general is transmitted every 20 milliseconds, as mentioned here. But in this case, because the long DRX cycle is 40 milliseconds, this means the packets will be transmitted every 40 milliseconds, but it will be bundled every 40 milliseconds. We'll have 2 packets. So now the InnoDB will buffer the packets until the user go to the on duration timer. As you can see, this on duration timer, which is 4 milliseconds. So the user is awake for 4 milliseconds only and is waiting for the InnoDB to start transmitting data. So the InnoDB now did that downlink transmission. As you can see here, this is the BDCH, and this is the allocated, for example, packets and BDCH resources in general. So in case if this particular packet is being failed, it's not somehow it's not being decoded, or there is, so the InnoDB need to make the retransmission after 8 milliseconds, right? But this cannot be done, right? Because first of all, we have something again called long DRX cycle, and this long DRX cycle where the user will go into the sleeping mode. It's 400 milliseconds. So he will be awaking within this long DRX, in the beginning of long DRX cycle, for only 4 milliseconds, and the remaining 36 milliseconds he will be in a sleeping mode, which is this part. This is the sleeping mode, and this is now awake mode. So he will be again going sleep mode, and the InnoDB cannot do the retransmission until the user again is in the on duration timer. So at the end of the long DRX cycle, it will start a new long DRX cycle, and the user now will come again into in the awake mode and duration timer here for 4 milliseconds and start receiving. Now assume that again this particular packet is being failed. What will happen in this case? It happened that now it's almost 80 milliseconds, right? So now they need to retransmit the same packets, but again after this long direct cycle, which is again after 40 milliseconds. And again, if you remember, we mentioned that the packet delay budget is 1 millisecond. So assume that the retransmission happened at the second 110 millisecond. This means it's crossing the 100 millisecond, so the packet will be lost and discarded. So the user will lose the packet. So actually, once you disable the DRX, what will happen? The NUB will have now will have the capability and will transmit the data or the packet at any time to the user, which means every 20 milliseconds it can be transmitted. So you will have many opportunities to retransmit the packets in case of the retransmission. In case of 2 or 3 retransmission attempt for this 40 millisecond, now we can have even having up to, for example, 5 or even more, because the NUB can retransmit the packets now every 20 millisecond, not every 40 millisecond, as an example for that part. Also, in general, as you can see here, that the transmission in general is sending every 40 millisecond, but in case if the race is off, so it will be every 20 milliseconds. So this also can improve the downlink scheduling delay or latency, because now the NLB, the users in DRX can transmit all the time every 20 milliseconds. And in general, the voice quality can improve if the user is out of DRX, because the latency is improving, so this can even having a better voice quality. So this is the main actually advantage of this feature. And the last part I would like to highlight, it's about the trade-off. For sure, if you disable the DRX, this kind of long DRX cycle is just made to keep the users in the sleeping mood where there is no retransmission or receiving, so this can save some battery. And also there is some probabilities in case if the user is in a very bad radio condition, he will not be able to receive this ROHC recuperation sent by the NLB, and this can result in even ROHC establishment and result in cold drop. So this is like cannot be a trade-off of that part. And in general, the DRX settings can be checked from during the QCI1 setup. You will find a ROHC confirmation message, including this on duration timer. For example, here mentioned subframe 4 means 4 subframe, which is equivalent. Each subframe is 1 millisecond, equivalent 4 millisecond. And you have the long DRX start offset, which is here mentioned as SF40, and this is equivalent to 40 milliseconds. And that's all about this feature. The next part I was just showing that this kind of improvement was observed after tuning this feature. The VoLTE uplink packet bad voice quality ratio from the OSS KPI is improved. As you can see here, the ratio was around 1.5%. It reduced to 1.1, even less. And for sure, the users in DRX, for example, before the user was entering more frequently, more users will enter DRX. Now less users are entering because now the users exiting the DRX. So this can be the impact from the KPIs point of view. Now let's move to the next feature. Okay, this feature actually, it's one of the very important features in VoLTE, especially to improve the coverage, which is actually, as mentioned by the name here, VoLTE rate recommendation. The 3GPP name is called Access Network Bit Rate Change. Simply, this is as a simple algorithm. What should be done? Initially, let's just explain what happens about this codec rate. As you know, I explained the codec rate in previous sessions. And the codec rate, this is, for example, assume that we are having a codec rate AVS is being used, or even wideband MR. So I assume that now during the calls, usually the codec rate is being negotiated during the VoLTE call setup. And during the call setup, the mobile originating call will be sending the same invite, his capability about the codec rate. Then the mobile terminating will be replying with his own capability ranges. Then they will agree and probably select the highest codec rate supported between both of them. But the codec rate will almost remain the same all over the call. Like this is the situation. Sometimes it will be changed, but actually I didn't see that much. But this is mainly about the device's decision to change or ask to change the codec rate type. But let's take into that. It's just being negotiated during the call setup, and it will be fixed almost all over the call. So assume now the users initially during the call setup started with AVS 24.4, which is the highest codec rate we can be used. So in this case, the users now start moving to a bad radio condition. Still, he's using the same codec rate, which is very high codec rate, sending with high bit rate and high samples. So in this case, the user is going to bad radio condition, but still using high codec rate. So this can observe into packet loss or even can drop a call. And now the user again moves to more bad radio condition to the very edge. Still the codec rate is same. So actually this feature is supposed to do that. It's supposed to change. The NLP is supposed to work with the user to adapt or to make a dynamic change for the codec rate in general based on the vendor specification. For example, let's assume uplink, like if you are speaking about the uplink codec rate, throughput, for example, or SINR or whatever, this is based on the vendor specification. But in general, let's assume in one word, based on radio condition. So if the radio condition is going bad, the NLP will instruct the users to change, or will instruct the user to change his codec rate. So this is the main, actually the main function of this feature. So this is what will happen here, that for example, if the NLP found that the user is moving to bad radio condition, it will send them a new codec rate, recommended codec rate, and the user will start negotiating with the terminating one or bearing user to confirm that this is the new agreed codec rate, which shall be used by both originating and terminating. Both of them should use the same codec rate. But there is one very important point. This feature requires a UE capability. Usually, if you look into the current situation in the market, not too many devices supporting the feature. It's very old feature, by the way. Not many devices are being supported the feature, but expecting in the future that the devices will start supporting this feature, because it will be very important, especially with the voice over NAT deployment and even the 3G shutdown and so on. So these two parameters you're supposed to find or verify from the UE capability information message, which is being sent from the user to the NLP. That this is supposed to be found, which is called recommended bitrate release 14 and recommended bitrate query release 14 as well. So this is supposed to be supported by the users in order to support the feature. Now let me explain some concept behind the 3GPP about this feature, which is very important. But just in summary, to summarize that feature, this feature actually will simply switch the code rate at a particular radio condition, which is actually can extend the VoLTE coverage. This is the main advantage. And also, it's not only decreasing the codec rate, it's the opposite way around. Assume the user moved from bad radio condition to good radio condition, it can even increase the codec rate, and in this case can improve even the voice quality, right? So this is actually, it's working even decreasing or increasing. Decreasing means you are extending the coverage, giving a bit much better coverage, less packet loss, better integrity. And if you are increasing the codec rate, you are getting better voice quality. Now let's move to just clear some concept from the 3GPP. As you can see here, this is an example in case if the access network bitrate change, the feature is going to decrease the rate. This figure actually I quoted from the 3GPP, and this feature is supposed to be supported by both voice and video in general. So actually here, as you can see in the third line here, which is step number 3, already there is ongoing RTB and the uplink from user 1 to user 2, and the media flow is UE, and this is a specific codec rate. Assume this codec rate is, for example, R0 centrate. So now the access network, which is the NLP, decided to change the bitrate for this particular user 1, because he found that, for example, he's now in a bad radio condition, so it will require to send him. So it will send him this uplink, which is AMBR, access network bitrate change net. It's found that the R1, that it would like to reduce the R1 because R0 is, in general, the codec rate now is the user in bad radio condition, so it will try to change the codec rate. So actually, this is required to decrease the codec rate, which is R1. This is decreasing the codec rate. So directly, now there will be a UE end-to-end decision. It will negotiate with the user N2, and it will directly send as long as it's decreasing, it will directly send the new packet with the decreased codec rate. As you can see here, UE start sending up the packet as a new assigned codec rate, which is less. Actually, the user will check the recommended rate sent by this NLP, and it will translate it into codec rate, because at the end the codec rate is being controlled by the UE, and it will start transmitting the data and uplink to the other users using the new codec rate. And as mentioned here by the 3GPP, that in case on adaptation in general, the adaptation results in a reduction of the media sender bitrate, that it decided the NLP to reduce the bitrate. So the change would be initiated immediately without any further signaling, which means, as you can see here, the UE once received the request, it will directly send to the other user with a new assigned codec rate, which is a less codec rate compared to the previous one. But in case if opposite way around, it's required to increase the codec rate. There might be some additional signaling. Let's explain that part. As you can see here, for example, for this one access network bitrate change in case of MBR increase, this is the same concept here. The user will being like transmitting, and this is I'm speaking about the uplink packet now, not downlink. Just giving example for the uplink codec rate change. So now again it was being transmitted. So the NLB now decided again to increase this time the codec rate, not to decrease it, to increase the codec rate. And in this case, because it's increasing codec rate, the actually the normal case scenario and some the depend it can be directly happen to increase the codec rate, because at the end the user one know what is the maximum supported codec rate by user two. But in some particular scenarios, if this other user, which is user two, for example, and this user believes that the most recently received MBR, which is a new MBR being sent for its uplink, no longer applies, or it's not cannot be accommodated by this particular users, it will send something called AMBR queue, which stands for Access Network Bitrate Change Query, to requesting the NLB to check his radio condition, for example, and start assigning another bitrate instead of the one being sent by user one. So, and this is for sure require the capability by both device, require this particular devices in case if it's being supported the capability of this AMBR queue, which is stand for query. So in this case, only if it's being supported by user two, it will be requesting the access network to charge the change. And the NLB now will assign this new codec rate. For example, assume that now this is R3 and this was R2. So now the user will send, so from user two will send to user one. I would like to, this is to receive at this particular codec rate, and then the UE1 will be start transmitting with agreed codec rate between both of them, and the media will be start set up with this additional signal, which is the codec rate being sent by the user 2. But this is just in case the user 2 is not being supported, if being supported the feature in general, and also in case if both nodes AN1 and AN2 is supporting the feature and the feature is being enabled. And the normal code scenario, as I know that depend on the vendor specification. This can be done directly, because at the end, the codec rate change is being always negotiated by user one and user two. So this even is this particular step where there is a query from the user two to the access network or NLP2 might not be done. This is actually 3GPP explanation, but you might find some differences compared to the vendors. But in general, this feature doesn't require any support from the core. It's mainly about that device capability. So you can have a try and check what kind of impact you can see in case of the codec rate, for example, change, how much the coverage is going to be extended and so on. So this is from the theoretical point of view. Let's move now to the last feature. Actually, this is the last feature, which is actually about downlink uplink frequency selective. If you're already working with a 4G network since long time back, even this is very well known feature. It's not only for the VoLTE, it's even for the PS. And it's very simple features where, as you can see from the figure here, assuming now we are speaking about the uplink frequency selective, from the name it's being kind of obvious that in the normal case scenario, as you can see from the bottom down here, that without the feature in general, the resource allocation, which is resource blocks, will be happening in a sequential manner. Assume that user one required, for example, 4, 3 RB, 10 RB, whatever. So then B will start assigning in a sequential manner. Once it's assigning here, it will now start assigning for the user two. It's not taking the radio condition of this particular frequencies into consideration. But in case of frequency selective being enabled for the feature, even for uplink and downlink, so the NLP now will start measuring, for example, if you're speaking the uplink, it will start measuring the uplink quality, and it will start estimating. It will start estimating the quality of this user. And this part, it's about the uplink SRS or uplink PUSCH SINR. I think I by mistake I mentioned the first feature which is the XDRX based on SNR or SRS. The XDRX is only based on the SNR, but this feature can be being based on SRS, standing reference signal, if it's being enabled, or based on the SINR. This is how the NLP will estimate whether the user is having a bad radio condition in this particular RBs or not. So assume now you have this user one here, UE1. This is the channel quality. So in this particular frequency, area is getting a good quality, so it will be assigning this as this way. For example, to give him this particular portion of frequency, assume that
the frequencies at the start of the band as an example, it will assigning him. Now the user 2 now, as you can see, this user U2 allocation, this is the frequency domain. It's starting assigning, for example, this particular area because it's having good quality. User 2, it's assigning him this particular frequency, which is here, for example, at the end of the band or mid of the band, because here user 2 quality profile is getting better. So now it's being assigning not in sequential manner anymore. It can be at any part of the frequency domain as showing here. So it, for example, instead of being in sequential manner, now it can be done in this way, where, for example, user 1 taking the resources here and user 2 not necessary to be continuous allocation, as you can see here, between user 1 and user 2. It will be starting at the end of the band, and this can guarantee that you will have a much better quality and even much better voice quality and even much better packet loss. This is actually the main idea, and this is I think it's very simple feature and it's well known. And if you are speaking about downlink frequency selective, this is usually based on the reported channel quality indicator, which is CQI, which is usually reported from the UE to the NOD, and the NOD based on the CQI can start doing this same concept, where it start allocating the good resource blocks for this particular users instead of allocating a particular or in a particular way as mentioned before here without frequency selective. The first feature we're going to cover today is called PUSCH Uplink Resource Block Reservation. This can have a different naming between one vendor to another, but the idea of this feature is very simple. The idea of this feature that you can reserve a particular PUSCH resources to be used only by VoLTE users. It will be only reserved for VoLTE users and it will be only used by them. So what is the gain of such? What kind of gain expected and what kind of drawbacks? So if you look into the figure below here, this is like the different cells, and this was the uplink interference for the resource blocks, allocated resource blocks. If you look into this particular area, the red one, you can see that there is high uplink interference at those particular resource blocks here. So if the VoLTE users being occupied those particular resources, this might cause a voice quality issues and might impact your MOS, right, and voice quality in general. So VoLTE is more sensitive to the interference compared to the data. So this feature you can look into, for example, the allocated resource blocks for those particular cells, and you can, for example, you see this area is the best area. You can reserve, for example, 3 resource blocks to be used only by VoLTE users. And once those resource block is being exhausted or occupied, still the VoLTE users can use the remaining resource blocks, but at least you would ensure that as a start point, they will be using the clean band or clean resources. And those resources also will never be used by data. So this resource will all the time being clean because there will be no any transmission from data users across the same resource blocks. And the drawbacks of that part for sure that as long as you're reserving those for VoLTE users only, so this might impact your peak throughput in general for the uplink, because this will be all the time reserved VoLTE users and cannot be used by data users. So the main recommendation usually for such features to be used as a scenario based. For example, to use it for a particular cells where you have high uplink interference and you would like to reserve a particular resources for those users. Also, there is another scenario where you have huge congestion, for example, in the cells, and you don't want like to impact the VoLTE users, so you reserve some resources for that. This is just scenarios. So usually this is like a scenario based. It's not being recommended to be done in complete network as an example. As you can see here, there is a clear gain in packet loss and block error rate once there was some resource being reserved for VoLTE. Also, the voice quality has been improved, as you can see here. So this is very simple feature, and the name of the feature can be different from one vendor to another. So let's move to the next feature. The next one, actually, it's also very simple. It's mainly as written from the name here. You can see it's called disable carrier aggregation for VoLTE users. For example, if you already have 4G carrier aggregation being operating, so you still can have VoLTE in the same time. So the VoLTE during the call, you can have a carrier aggregation. So why usually the operator recommend, or in general it's being recommended to disable carrier aggregation? Actually, this is because during the carrier aggregation you can have some impact which might impact your call drop rate, especially for VoLTE. As you know that first all the carrier aggregation in general, it require the NOD require all the time to deliver the A1, A2, A6 reports which related to the carrier aggregation addition and removal and carrier aggregation cell change, for example, secondary cell change.
So for example, those required to be delivered by the A node B. So if you have more carriers, you require more RRC configuration. So this kind of repetition or repetitive RRC configuration, this is might lead into sometimes into RRC reestablishment if the user is in a poor radio condition, in case if the user didn't receive the RRC configuration message. Also in general, if you have multiple carrier aggregation, let's assume 2 or 3 carrier aggregation or 4, you require a repetitive SSL configuration, right? Even addition or removal. So this is also can have the same situation where the users during the call trying to add a secondary cell or third cell, or trying to configure some of the carrier aggregation cells, and somehow there is some failures in that. So this increasing the probability that you'll having RSC establishment, which might lead into drop as well. And the third part, in case if you have, as shown here, uplink carrier aggregation being enabled, not only downlink. So in case of uplink carrier aggregation, this is actually will cause a power limitation, because usually the user need to use for each carrier, it needs to transmit the different power. For example, as I will be highlighting in the next slide, for example, if you have a 23 dB maximum power, so the power need to transmit it between to be split between the two carriers, so the power will reduce by 3 dB. It will be around 20 dB. And assume also you have 3 carriers, it will be go even to 17 dB. So the uplink carrier aggregation in general will limit the uplink coverage, uplink transmitted coverage for the users. So this also can be reflected in the coverage. That's why usually it's being recommended to disable the carrier aggregation during using the VoLTE calls. Let's try to get a figure about this particular area where we have uplink, how it will try to visualize how the power will be split, as mentioned here. So in general, this will be reflected mostly in the VoLTE call drop rate. Okay, as you can see in the figure in the right here, this is assuming that this is the transmission from the U side, and this is the UTX branches. You have two TX branches. The maximum power is 23 dB, and the main idea that you have one carrier for Fuji and secondary carrier. So the user now to need to split the power of the 23. So he will send 20 here and 20 here. So this is actually will be reflecting into a less power for this particular users. Even though the max is 23, because the power is being splitted, he lost around 3 dB. And even though if you went for more 3 carriers, this is will reduce even more, and also for 4 carriers will be reduced for more as well. But this is mainly for uplink, and usually even if uplink you have it enabled in the network, usually the maximum supported by the users is 2, and I think usually it's rarely being used in general, but this is just from theoretical background. So this was showing an impact from the one of the networks. For example, you can see there is this simulation from one of the networks. As you can see, there is a good improvement of voltage drop rate after the carrier aggregation was being disabled. And you might not see this in different, like if you implemented in your network, you might see this. This depend on the network situation in general, user location, and many other aspects. For example, how many carrier aggregation you have in the network. But in general, it's being recommended to disable the carrier aggregation for VoLTE users. So let's move to the next feature. Actually, the next feature is, you can say it's exactly, or the next parameter is exactly the same concept as the carrier aggregation. It's for the NSA users. If you have 5G NSA or ENDC, it's also being recommended to disable that. Why? Because the first point again, which we just being highlighted, the power will be split between one leg being transmitted 4G and one leg for 5G NSA. So again, you will lost around 3 dB. So this is limiting your uplink coverage. And this is the main reason actually, because this is limiting your uplink coverage. So in this case, it's not recommended to enable the ENDC for the VoLTE users. So you not required to have this kind of splitting, or in general ENDC being allowed for VoLTE users. You need required to go for this scenario. Also, other scenario that sometimes this kind of ENDC addition, it requires signaling, so there might some interference between the signal, interference or race condition, or in other words, the procedures or process of the signaling of the call setup of the VoLTE also being conflicted with ENDC. So maybe in some vendors you will have this kind of conflict that will prioritize, for example, the ENDC addition over the VoLTE. So this is might lead into, for example, a call setup issue for the VoLTE. But I think this issue is being usually the vendor address this issue through that pressurizing the voltage signaling over the ENDC. So the main limitation is about losing the uplink coverage. You will lose around 3 dB in case if you are using ENDC for VoLTE users. So it's also being recommended to disable the ENDC for the user in order to improve your drop rate. So this is exactly or similar to the carrier aggregation scenario, which being highlighted in the previous slide. Now let's jump to the last feature. Actually, the last feature, it's not particularly related to the VoLTE, but it's just like it can also be benefit for VoLTE. I have quoted these pictures from Share Tech Note. You can go there for Share Tech Note. I will add this video, the link in the video description. It's having even more details and very good details about the same particular thing. The main idea of the hopping in general, PUSCH hopping, this is can be having a very good improvement because doing something called frequency diversity. So let's just explain from the beginning. If you look into this figure without hopping, you can see this is, for example, the subband, which is the frequencies domain, and this is the time domain, the subframes and so on. You can see that all the resources being allocated, for example, at subband 0 or whatever resource block 0, whatever you can call it, it's being allocated here all over the frame. So there is no change throughout the frame allocation. The resources are not being changed. And in case somehow if you have a frequency impairment, you have interference at this particular area, for example, at subband 0. So in this case, you would be interfered all the time. This where the frequency hopping can get some gain in case of the frequency allocation of frequency of the frequency hopping. For example, if you look into this picture, you will find that the first subframe, the resource being allocated here, and the second subframe, it's being allocated at different subband on different source block. So this is making like a frequency diversity, which accordingly can be reflected in your quality and accordingly can be reflected in your coverage. So it can improve the packet loss and even the quality in general, the voice quality in general, which is the most. This is the main idea. And there is two types of the hopping, which is inter subframe, as you can see, which will be the frequency allocation will be each subframe, as you can see, change it each subframe. And there is intra subframe. For example, here the first part is being here, and the second slot, for example, is being allocated in the second slot is being allocated in different resource blocks. And again, the main idea that this is increasing the frequency diversity and can be reflected in packet loss. But this is actually cannot mitigate such issues because you are not expecting that you will have a clean band whenever you do a frequency hopping, right? Because this is not a frequency selective. Frequency selective, if you remember, we discussed about it before, is selecting the location of the resource blocks based on the quality, correct? So this is like frequency hopping in general, like for sure the frequency selective, it will be more beneficial in terms of this particular scenario because it will selecting the clean resource blocks from the beginning. So this case actually can mitigate, but it cannot completely eliminate because again, you might have this kind of impairment of frequency for example, in subband 3 whenever the allocation is being done. So yeah, so this was the main idea of the today features. Next part will cover the last features. So the first feature we're going to start with today is semi-persistent scaling. I believe you might be aware about this feature. It's a very simple one, which is again mainly used to reduce the BDCH congestion, like to have a BDCH capacity enhancement in general, and particularly to use in high load scenarios. So let's first like try to recall what was the normal scheduling in the VoLTE. If you remember, the VoLTE packets is being transmitted every 20 milliseconds. So you will have the BDCH allocation or BDCH grant will be allocated every 20 millisecond here. And accordingly, you will have your BRBs or resource blocks and the MCS or the scheduling part being allocated to the user every 20 millisecond based on the BDCH allocation. So and BDCH grant allocation. So you can see, for example, in this particular scenario, we are assuming that this for particular users being moved, so they're having a different radio condition. So the input is scheduling different location of the resource blocks, for example, here, as you can see here, and also assuming you have a different MCS. So the resources being changed as you can see here. While in the semi-persistent scheduling, what it will do, in order to save the BDCH, like to improve or reduce the BDCH condition, it will do the BDCH allocation only one time. In the beginning of the call, for example, it will allocate the BDCH, and this is BDCH will have the grant. It will have information about again the BDCH resources or BDCH resource blocks and MCS as well, moderation scheme. So, but in this case, it will be fixed allocation. For example, it will have a fixed number of resource blocks with fixed location and also fixed MCS. Let's assume, for example, MCS 15 or 14 or whatever. So the same resources and location for BRBs and MCS will be used all over the call. So this means that every 20 milliseconds, there will be no need to having allocation for BDCH resources. So this is will save the BDCH and will have a great improvement in the BDCH allocation, as you can see here. While, but the main point here, which is might result in some drawbacks, that the allocation or the scheduling information for the MCS and BRBs will be the same all over the call. And this is, for example, might cause a problems if, for example, if you're assuming in the um, high speed scenarios, whenever the user is moving with high speed and there is high variation in radio condition. So this is might cause a problem, especially if the user moved, for example, from a good radio condition area to a poor radio condition. So this might increase the silent calls or even the drops or packet loss or whatever. For example, also in the scenarios where the user is moving from outdoor scenario to indoor scenario, so this can also cause a problem. So usually, like, this is a scenario based feature. You can just enable in very particular scenarios whenever you have a very high congestion of BDCH, and also for the scenarios where you are not expecting a lot of variation in the radio condition. For example, let's assume you have one sites, IBS sites or indoor sites, where you know that the area is very well covered. So for example, you can enable the feature for this site. This is just an example. For sure, every network will have a different behavior, but I'm just giving you some ideas about it. And in general, there is some requisite for this feature. For sure, the user supposed to support VoLTE, plus there is the user support the feature itself, which is called semi-persistent scheduling. And in the next slide, I will explain how you can get the information whether the user is supporting the feature or not. And for sure that the ABC or the core network is supposed to support the IMS in general, IMS based voice services. And here there is from the scheduling information, the normal scheduling here, that initially you will have a ERAT setup QCI1, and then you will have the BCH allocation. For example, this is BH grant or order 1, and every 20 milliseconds there will be allocation for BDCH allocation. DCI information, for example, being sent with DCH order 1, order 2, order 3. While here for the whenever the semi-resistive scheduling, initially there will be a wrap setup QCI1 and the SPS will be configured to this particular user. Then it will be activated through only one BDCH activation during the talk support or during the call in general. Once the call being released, the BDCH or the SPS will be deactivated through again sending a DCI from ENDC to the UE. So this is in general about the feature. Now let's move to the next part about how to check the capability of this feature. So as you can see here, for example, this is explaining how you can check the capability, SPS capability, whether the user supporting the semi-persistent schedule or not. For example, if you look into this figure, this is from the UE capability information message. Like whenever in 4G you have the UE capability information being sent, so you'll find under the UE capability message, you can just go UE capability information, then you'll find UE track capability, then under RF parameters, you'll find something called FGI or feature group indicators. And this is one of the very important messages to know about it, especially for the UE capability. As you can see, it's like consisting of 32 bits. Each bit of those is like indicating a particular feature, whether this feature is being supported or not. In next slide, I will give some information about it, and I will attach the details about each of these bits, the explanation or definition in the video description. So for example, the bit number 29 here, this is showing whether the user is supporting the SPS semi-resistant scheduling feature or not. For example, if this bit is 1, this means it's supporting. If 0 means it does not support. So this is like simply what to do. The next part here, actually, it's about whenever the user, the in will be configured the E with SPS. This is the configuration of the activation. The configuration would be done through the layer 3, while the activation would be done through the DCI information. So for example, here, this is ROHC configuration message being sent at any time. It will have this SPS configuration downlink confirmation or even uplink. And if you'd like to get more details about this part, you can refer to this below link. It having very good information as well if you would like to go for more details about it. So yeah, so now let's move to the part related to the FGI feature to give more explanation about it. Okay, this is just like I quoted this table from 3GPP TS 36.331. This one you can see this is like showing the table for all the bits and under the FGI or feature group indicator, which each one of those bits like giving explanation or like addressing whether this bit supporting or related to which feature. For example, if you look into this bit 28, it's just showing to you TTI bundling. For example, if bit 28 is 1, this means a user supporting TTI bundling feature. If it's 0, this means it does not support. Same for 29 for semi-persistent scheduling. and same for the handover part. And again, I will attach the video description, the complete explanation for the 32 bits, because here I give some examples in the video description just for your reference in case if you need it for any other use. So now let's move to the next feature which we have today. The second feature actually is also one of the very good feature and also easy to understand features. For example, this is called downlink multi-packet bundling. And from the name itself, it's kind of giving some explanation about this, how this feature works. For example, if you look into this, the normal scheduling again, which we explained the same in the previous slides, that the allocation will be every 20 milliseconds, and you will have your BDCH resource blocks and MCS and so on. And here you can see every 20 milliseconds you have BDCH allocation, and you have the related resource blocks for the BDCH and for the MCS as well. So you will have the packets here. While this feature, what it do, as you can see, it's called downlink voice packet bundling feature. And as explained here, this feature can bundle, or two voice packets can be bundled for the scheduling. What it mean by this? For example, you have one voice packet here and one voice packet here. So instead of sending two different intervals here, as you can see here, it will just bundle both packets together here. So we'll have more allocation for sure for the BDCH, but will save the BDCH in the next interval. So the next interval you will not have any VoLTE packets because both of them being transmitted here, and this will be repeated again. So for example, the scheduling here, instead of 20 milliseconds, it will be each 40 milliseconds. So as you can see, will save also a lot of BDCH, can improve the BDCH capacity, but at the same time also it's having a drawbacks or downside because it can increase the VoLTE latency. As you can see here, this is whenever we enable the feature before, we have seen an increase in the VoLTE latency. So this is one of the drawbacks. So again, this is also scenario based, depend on whatever the target or your target in the network where you need to optimize. So now let's move next to the last feature of today's video. Okay, the last feature here is called delay-based scheduling, and you can say this is kind of become a must feature where it must be enabled because this is have a very good impact in the voice quality and also in the particularly for the cell edge users where it can improve the block error rate. Also, the voice quality will improve a lot for the cell edge. So how this feature work actually? Actually, this feature work based on the buffer delay, or you can say that the ENOD will look into the users where it's having in its buffer. So if it's found some users where it's having a high waiting time, for example, the buffer delay for these users is very high based on some values. This might be depend on the vendors itself. So for example, assuming here UE1 having a waiting time more than 30 milliseconds, UE2 have 25 milliseconds. So this will be the priority of the scheduling. So the normal case scenario for the scheduling, you know that we have round robin, you have max over I, and you have this kind of things. If you remember for 4G in general, but in this case we'll use this. This is how the feature will work. It will prioritize the users with high buffer or high waiting time. Instead of the user was having less waiting time. So let's try to simulate this to see how this feature works. Assume this is your scenario. This is the buffer delay of in the input B side. This is the input B side. And here we have UE1. UE1, we assume that the waiting time is more than 30 milliseconds. And you have CQI number 7. So assume here you have 3 packets for user 1, 3 packets for user 2, and 3 packets, for example, for user 4. And this user 1 is edge user. It's having a poor radio condition. It can be in downlink or uplink, but I'm just giving an estimation like that to just present that this user is kind of edge user. So if you can see this buffer delay, the arrow here indicates that the buffer delay is very high. So whenever the packet is up here, this means the packet has been waiting for a long time. So how the scheduling will be done for the users? In this case, the input B itself will prioritize the packets with very high delay. So for example, the first packet will be transmitted will be this particular packet. So if you move this one, it will be the first packet to be transmitted to user 1. Again, if you look into the second packet, still having a higher waiting time compared to the others. So if you click in here, also this will be scheduled for the users. Now moving for the second user having this packet, which is also having a higher buffer delay compared to the other users and the other packets. So this again will be scheduled. Here moving for UE4, it will be the same. So to be scheduled, then this one, then we'll have this one, then this one will be moving, and so on. This one, then we'll be ending for that one. So in this case, this is what it will do. It will improve the voice quality because you improve the waiting time, this user having a more faster scheduling, and for sure this will be reflecting from the KPIs point of view. You can see improvement, for example, in block error rate, especially in the uplink. And this is what we have seen before. And even from if you have the most drive, you can see also the voice quality will be improving a lot. So let me show you an example from one of the networks. For example, here after enabling the delay-based scheduling, we have seen more than 20% in improvement in the uplink iPlayer, and also from the drag test at that time, we have seen improvement in the voice quality. And that's it. That's all for today's video. Thank you very much, and see you next video. And please press like and drop a comment and share the video with your friends. Thank you, and see you next video.